The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, the gentle creak of the house settling in for the night. These are the sounds of safety, of routine. But sometimes, in the spaces between these familiar noises, something else lurks. Something that whispers of what lies just beyond the comfortable edge of our perception. Tonight, we're going to explore those spaces. We'll dim the lights, put on our headphones, and listen closely. Because some fears aren't about monsters in the dark, but about the darkness seeping into the everyday. About the moments when the normal becomes wrong. Settle in. The night is young, and the stories are waiting. The first thing I noticed was the packages, piled high on Mrs. Henderson's porch. She was usually so meticulous, bringing things in right away. But these had been sitting there for 2 days, getting damp from the morning dew. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other's schedules, and Mrs. Henderson, a sweet older lady who baked the best apple pie, was as predictable as the sunrise. I was 28 at the time, working from home as a freelance graphic designer, so I had a pretty good view of the street from my office window. It was late spring, the kind of weather where you could leave your windows open all day, and everything felt peaceful, almost idyllic. That pile of boxes was just the tiniest wrinkle in an otherwise perfectly smooth routine, something that probably wouldn't have even registered for most people. A few more days passed, and the boxes were still there. Then I started noticing other small things. Her car, a beige sedan, was always parked in the same spot in her driveway, but now it was positioned slightly differently, angled almost like someone had backed it in a hurry. Her porch light, which usually came on like clockwork at dusk, stayed off one night, then two. It was nothing major, just little deviations from the pattern of a woman who lived her life by a very strict, very public schedule. I told myself she was probably just visiting family out of state. Maybe she had a fall and was recovering at her daughter's. Still, a faint, unsettling feeling began to prickle at the back of my mind. A sense that something was off, even if I couldn't quite put my finger on it. About a week after the packages first appeared, I saw a dark, unfamiliar sedan parked across the street from Mrs. Henderson's house. It was a late model, black, with tinted windows, and it looked completely out of place on our street of minivans and older sedans. It sat there for hours, then for days, always in a slightly different spot, but always close enough to have a clear view of Mrs. Henderson's property. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was a contractor, or maybe a relative visiting a different neighbor. But no one else on the street had visitors that stayed for so long. Every time I looked out, I'd catch a glimpse of that car, just sitting there, silent and still. It was like a black smudge on an otherwise bright, familiar landscape. Then came trash day. Mrs. Henderson's trash cans, a blue one for recycling and a green one for refuse, were always meticulously placed at the curb by 7 a.m. This time they weren't. I noticed them sitting by the side of her garage, unemptied. Later that afternoon, I saw someone moving them. It wasn't Mrs. Henderson. From my window, all I could see was a tall, thin figure, hunched over, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. They moved quickly, almost furtively, pulling the cans back to the garage, then disappearing inside the house. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was her grandson helping out, but I'd never seen her grandson, and the way they moved, so fast and without looking around, felt off. It was too quiet, too deliberate for a family member just doing a chore. That night, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of a distant dog barking. I got up to get a glass of water and, out of habit, glanced out my living room window towards Mrs. Henderson's house. A faint light glowed from her living room, a soft, warm yellow that usually meant she was reading. But the porch light was still off, and the house had felt so dark and empty for days. As I watched, the light moved, slowly, from one window to another, like someone carrying a lantern. It wasn't a steady, room-filling light, more like a focused beam. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't Mrs. Henderson's routine. She always slept soundly through the night. The light seemed to pause in the kitchen, then moved back towards the front of the house before disappearing completely. The next evening, I was taking my dog, Buster, out for his last walk before bed. As we rounded the corner to my backyard, which shares a fence with Mrs. Henderson's, Buster suddenly tensed up. He let out a low growl, his hackles raised, staring intently at her yard. I peered over the fence, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, again with a baseball cap, standing near the back door of Mrs. Henderson's house. They weren't doing anything, just standing there, looking out into the darkness. The way they stood, perfectly still, sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't the kind of stance someone takes when they're enjoying a quiet evening in their yard. It was observant, almost predatory. I quickly pulled Buster inside, my mind racing, unable to shake the image of that motionless figure. The following morning, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I walked over to Mrs. Henderson's mailbox, pretending to check my own. Her flag was down, but I could see a small stack of mail inside. I hesitated, then carefully opened the box, just enough to glimpse the names. All of it was addressed to Mrs. Henderson, but there was one envelope, stark white and plain, with no return address, simply her name and address handwritten in block letters. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was too sharp, too deliberate, and the mail felt strangely light, as if it contained only a single sheet of paper. It hit me then, a cold wave of realization. Someone was living in Mrs. Henderson's house, and they were watching. They were observing her mail, her routines, everything. I went home and immediately called the non-emergency police line. I explained everything, the packages, the car, the moving light, the figure, the mail. The dispatcher listened patiently, and within 20 minutes, a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers approached Mrs. Henderson's house cautiously. I watched from my window as they knocked, waited, then tried the doorknob. It was locked. They circled the house, peering into windows, their flashlights cutting through the morning gloom. They found no forced entry, no obvious signs of a break-in. But the officer who spoke to me afterward confirmed my suspicions. The house felt abandoned, but not empty. He said they'd keep an eye on it, but without proof of a crime or Mrs. Henderson's explicit permission, their hands were tied. It was a chilling limbo. The house was hers, but someone else was using it. Later that day, feeling a knot in my stomach, I called Mrs. Henderson's cell phone. It rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound casual, asking if she was home or if she needed me to water her plants. I didn't mention any of the unsettling things. An hour later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, my heart pounding. There was a pause, a soft rustling sound, then a click. No one spoke. The line went dead. I immediately called the police again, describing the call. They traced the number. It was a burner phone, activated just a few days prior, used once, then discarded. It was the last time I saw the dark sedan, and the last time I heard anything unusual from Mrs. House. But the feeling that someone was watching, waiting, never truly left me. It's easy to dismiss a new habit, a small change in someone you see every day. But what if those subtle shifts aren't just quirks, but signals? What if the path you walk, the faces you pass, are part of something much larger, something you're already caught in the current of? The small scratch on my car's passenger side door wasn't there when I parked it last night, and it wasn't a casual ding from a shopping cart. It looked intentional, a thin, jagged line. I was 26 then, living alone in a small apartment complex in Phoenix, Arizona, working as a junior architect. My routine was clockwork. Up at 6 a.m., coffee, a quick check of emails, and out the door by 6:45 to beat the worst of the morning traffic. The commute to the downtown office was usually uneventful. A 25-minute drive of bland radio and anticipation for the day's projects. It was a comfortable, predictable life, one I'd carefully built after college, and I liked it that way. Seeing that scratch, though, was like a tiny tremor in my carefully constructed predictability. I shrugged off the scratch. It was probably just some kids with keys, I reasoned, or a clumsy driver in the next spot who didn't leave a note. Annoying, but not a big deal. The next morning, though, something else was off. My usual parking spot at work, the one I'd used for 3 years, was taken. It was a minor inconvenience, but it bugged me. I always parked in the same corner spot, furthest from the entrance, partially shaded by an old oak tree. It was never taken. I ended up a few rows over, closer to the main entrance than I liked. As I walked into the building, I glanced back. The car in my spot was a nondescript silver sedan, utterly ordinary. I made a mental note to leave earlier tomorrow, just in case. The silver sedan was there again the next day, and the day after that. Always in my spot. Always there when I arrived, always there when I left. It was starting to feel less like a coincidence and more like a deliberate act. I found myself looking for it. A subtle knot forming in my stomach each morning as I approached the lot. I even started to notice other things. The car's windows were tinted, so I could never see inside. It looked clean, well-maintained. No bumper stickers, no personal touches. Just a generic, anonymous silver car. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a new employee, or someone who just preferred that particular spot. But the feeling of being watched, of something being slightly off-kilter, began to cling to me. One evening, leaving work a little later than usual, I noticed the silver sedan pulling out of the lot right behind me. My heart gave a little jump, but I told myself it was just heading in the same direction. It was a main road after all, but it stayed behind me. Through 2 turns, a traffic light, and a short stretch of highway, it was always there, a persistent shadow in my rearview mirror. I sped up slightly, and so did it. I slowed down, and it matched my pace. A cold dread started to seep in. I took an unexpected exit, a route I never took home, just to test it. The silver sedan followed, turning off the main road right behind me, its headlights glaring in the growing dusk. Panic started to set in. I drove faster, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and my rear view. I knew this area. It was mostly residential, quiet streets, easy to get lost if you didn't know your way around. I took a sharp right, then a left, weaving through the suburban maze. The silver sedan was still there, unwavering. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. Call the police? What would I even say? A car is following me, and it parks in my spot at work? It sounded flimsy. I needed proof, or at least a clearer incident. I decided to head to the nearest police station, hoping that would scare them off, or at least give me a safe place. As I pulled into the brightly lit parking lot of the police station, the silver sedan pulled into a spot a few cars away from mine, its engine still running. I sat for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs, staring at it. Then, cautiously, I opened my door and stepped out, keeping my eyes fixed on the other car. No one emerged. The driver's side window was still tinted, impenetrable. I walked slowly towards the station entrance, my hand hovering over my phone. Just as I reached the doors, I glanced back. The silver sedan's headlights flickered off. The engine died. Silence. I watched for another minute, but nothing happened. It was just a silent, empty car in the lot. I went inside, explained the situation to the desk officer, who listened patiently but seemed unimpressed. Unless they've threatened you or committed a crime, there's not much we can do, ma'am, he said. It sounds like a nuisance, but not yet illegal. Frustrated, I went home. The next morning, I parked far from my usual spot. Before heading into work, I bought a small, discreet dash cam and installed it that evening, pointing it outwards. I figured if the Silver Sedan showed up again, I'd have something concrete. The next few days were uneventful, the silver car nowhere to be seen. I started to relax, thinking maybe the trip to the police station had scared them off, or maybe it had just been a series of bizarre coincidences after all. A week later, I decided to check the dash cam footage just to be sure. It was mostly boring, just my car parked in various spots, people walking by. Then I fast-forwarded to the night of the police station incident. The footage showed my car pulling into the lot, followed by the Silver Sedan. Parked, lights off, engine off. For 5 minutes, nothing. Then, a figure emerged from the driver's side. It was a man average height, wearing a dark hoodie, so his face was obscured. He got out, walked to the back of his car, and opened the trunk. He pulled something out, then walked over to my car. My blood ran cold as I watched him reach for my passenger door. The camera didn't show what he did, only his arm reaching. He was there for about 30 seconds. Then he walked back to his car, put whatever he had back in the trunk, got in and drove away. I watched it several times, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. What had he done? What had he put in my car? I ran outside, flashlight in hand, frantically searching the passenger side. Nothing. No new scratches, no signs of tampering. But then, as I scanned the floorboard, I saw it. A small, empty glass bottle tucked under the passenger seat. It was a miniature perfume sample bottle, the kind you get at department stores. The label was peeled off, but I could still smell a faint, cloying sweetness. I picked it up with a tissue, my fingers trembling, and stared at the tiny, empty vial. It wasn't the smell that terrified me. It was the chilling thought of how he knew what kind of perfume I wore. The perfume was a very specific, limited edition scent I'd worn every day for years. It wasn't a common brand. You couldn't just find it anywhere. He must have seen me, heard me, somehow figured it out. He didn't want to hurt me physically. He wanted to be close to me, to experience what I experienced. The scratch on the car, the stolen parking spot, the following, it wasn't about aggression. It was about presence. He was documenting my life, learning my habits, collecting pieces of me. The thought that someone had been silently watching me, smelling me, for weeks, possibly months, made my skin crawl. I moved out of that apartment complex the very next week, changed my route, changed my perfume. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I still catch a phantom whiff of that cloying sweetness, and I wonder if he's still out there, finding new ways to get close. Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't an open threat, but a closed door. The feeling that you've been locked out, or worse, locked in. What if the very things meant to protect us are the ones that leave us exposed, or invite something unwelcome inside? The first thing that felt off was my toothbrush. I know how insane that sounds, but I swear it's true. One morning, I reached for it, and it just wasn't there. Not in its holder, not on the counter, not knocked behind the sink. Vanished. I was 24, living alone in a small rental house in a quiet part of suburban Ohio. It wasn't exactly a high-crime area, more like nothing ever happens here territory. I figured I'd probably just sleepwalked it into another room or something equally stupid, even though I'd never done anything like that before. I tossed it up to being tired and bought a new one that afternoon. It was easy to dismiss. A few days later, I came home from work and found the back door, the one leading to the small deck off the kitchen, slightly ajar. Not wide open, just enough that the latch hadn't caught properly. I always double-checked it, a habit from growing up with a slightly paranoid dad, so it immediately nagged at me. I walked through the house, checking every room, every window. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of forced entry, no belongings missing. I convinced myself it must have been the wind, or maybe I was just more scatterbrained than I like to admit. I pushed it closed, heard the satisfying click, and even locked the deadbolt this time just to be sure. Then the mail started getting weird. Nothing sinister, just not my mail. Catalogs for pet supplies. I don't own pets. Flyers for local businesses I'd never heard of in towns an hour away. At first, I thought it was a postal error, but it happened several times over a week. The names on the junk mail were never mine, nor were they fake names that would indicate a prank. They were legitimate-looking names addressed to current resident, or sometimes just an initial and last name. I checked my own mail and it would be there mixed in. It was like someone was subtly testing the waters, seeing if I'd notice, or perhaps just trying to make me feel a little disoriented. One evening, I came into the dining room, which I rarely used, and noticed one of the chairs was pulled out from the table by about 6 inches. Not dramatically, not like someone had just sat there, but enough to catch my eye. I had dusted that room the day before, and I knew for a fact every chair was pushed neatly under the table. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't something the wind could do. This wasn't me being forgetful. Someone had been in my house. But why? And why leave such tiny, almost imperceptible signs? It felt deliberate, like a game, designed to make me question my own sanity before I even understood what was happening. I started checking my locks obsessively. Every night, every morning. That's when I found it. The spare key to my back door, the one I kept hidden under a fake rock near the rose bush, was gone. I remember specifically putting it there weeks ago, after a neighbor had needed to water my plants while I was out of town. I'd even double-checked it was there when I got back. Now, the fake rock was still there, but it was empty inside. A cold, heavy dread settled over me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't paranoia. Someone had my key. Someone had been inside my home, not just once, but multiple times, and they had access whenever they wanted. That realization was sickening. The next few days were a blur of fear. I changed the locks immediately, adding a deadbolt to the front door that hadn't had one. I bought a cheap security camera for the living room and pointed it at the front door, even though I suspected the real threat was coming from the back. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside my window, sent a jolt of terror through me. I barely slept. I ate quick microwave meals, afraid to use the kitchen, the room nearest the back door. The silence of the house, which I once found comforting, was now suffocating. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I felt completely exposed. 2 nights later, I woke up to an unsettling quiet. I usually heard the low hum of my window unit, but it was off. I tried to turn on the lamp beside my bed, and nothing happened. Power outage, I thought, immediately checking my phone for service. No full bars. My heart hammered. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight and slowly made my way to the living room to check the security camera. It was unplugged. Not just from the wall, but the USB cable was neatly coiled beside it, almost as if someone had tidied up. They didn't want the power out, they just wanted to ensure the camera was useless. The message was clear. They knew I was watching and they were still in control. The power came back on moments later, but I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, running on fumes, I went to take out the trash. My kitchen trash can has a foot pedal to open the lid. As I stepped on it, something was off. The bag inside felt lighter. I looked closer. It was a new bag. The trash I had put in the night before, mostly food scraps from my microwave dinner, was gone. Someone had emptied my trash and replaced the bag. They weren't just in my house. They were tidying up after themselves. It was an act of disturbing intimacy, an invasion so profound it made my skin crawl. They weren't there to steal. They were there to exist in my space. I called the police, of course. They took my statement, looked around, and found nothing. No fingerprints, no real evidence of forced entry, just my word against nothing. They suggested I move. I did. Within the week, I was out of that house and into an apartment complex with strict security. I thought I was finally safe. But a month later, I got a package. No return address. Inside was a single, empty picture frame. It was a cheap plastic frame, but stuck to the glass was a small, perfectly pressed rose petal. It was from the rose bush outside my old back door, the one where I used to hide the key. The one they had taken. They still knew where I was. We leave little pieces of ourselves everywhere. A forgotten scarf, a misplaced item. But what if a part of you, a memory, a feeling, is left behind not by accident, but by design? What if the things we receive aren't always given freely, or without a hidden cost? The small, handwritten note was tucked neatly into the top of my mailbox. Not inside where the actual mail went, but just sitting there, perched on the flag like it was waiting to be noticed. I was 22, living alone for the first time in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, working a pretty standard 9 to 5 at a marketing agency. My routine was solid: wake up, coffee, work, gym, dinner, bed. It was a comfortable, predictable life, and I liked it that way. The note itself was innocuous enough, just a simple hello in neat, looping cursive. No name, no return address, just that one word. I figured it was a prank from a friend. Maybe one of them finally figured out where I lived, even though I hadn't given out my new address to many people yet. I crumpled it up, tossed it in the kitchen trash, and didn't think much more about it that day. A few days later, it happened again. This time, the note wasn't in the mailbox. It was taped to my front door, right at eye level, a small piece of paper with the same distinct handwriting. This one said, "Saw you walking to your car this morning. Nice top." My heart did a weird little stutter. I had been wearing a new blue blouse that day, one I was actually pretty excited about. It wasn't explicit, not threatening, but it felt specific. Too specific for a random prank. I looked up and down the street. Empty. The houses around me were set back a bit, with mature trees and bushes, so you couldn't easily see who was coming and going without really trying. I peeled the note off, careful not to touch too much of it, and again, tossed it. But this time it gnawed at me. Who would notice my top? Who would even know it was new? The next week brought a small potted succulent. It was a cute little plant, nothing fancy, sitting on my porch step when I got home from work, and tucked into its soil was another note, folded small. "Hope you like green. It suits your living room." My living room, I remembered with a jolt, had a few green accents, mostly throw pillows and a rug. It wasn't obvious from the street, not unless someone was actively looking in through the windows. The idea of someone watching me, watching my home, was starting to bloom into a cold, prickly fear. I brought the plant inside, mostly out of a weird sense of obligation, but placed it on a shelf in a less visible part of the house. I also started making sure my blinds were closed the moment I got home, and I began double-checking my locks more frequently. Then came the night I woke up to a faint clicking sound. It was past 2 a.m., pitch black outside, and my house was usually dead quiet. The clicking was soft, rhythmic, and coming from downstairs. My breath hitched in my throat. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears, my heart hammering against my ribs. It sounded like something tapping lightly against a window pane. Not a branch, not rain, but a deliberate, light tap. 1, 2, 3. Then a pause. Then again. I wanted to move, to call the police, but I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer terror of what I might see, or what might see me, if I went to the window. The clicking continued for what felt like an eternity, maybe 10 minutes, before it just stopped. The silence that followed was even heavier, more suffocating than the sound. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I called my brother, Mark, who lived a few towns over. I tried to sound casual, but my voice wavered as I told him about the notes, the plant, and the tapping. He was immediately concerned and told me to get a security camera. Later that day, I drove to a big box store to buy one. When I got back, something was off in my driveway. I always parked in the same spot, right under the porch light. But my car was shifted, angled slightly differently. And the driver's side door was ajar, just a hair, not fully closed. My stomach dropped. I hadn't forgotten to close it. I was meticulous about locking my car. I approached cautiously, peering inside. Nothing seemed to be missing, but on the passenger seat, neatly folded, was a small, plush blanket. A note was tucked underneath it. Thought you might be cold last night. Stay warm. That night, the security camera was installed, pointing directly at my front door and driveway. I barely slept, jumping at every creak. The next morning, I reviewed the footage, heart pounding. The first few hours were uneventful. Then, around midnight, a figure appeared, stepping out from behind the large oak tree at the edge of my property. It was a man, indistinct in the low light, wearing a dark hoodie, his face obscured by shadow. He walked slowly, deliberately, directly up to my car. He tried the handle and it opened. He paused, looked around, then placed something inside. He closed the door gently, then walked over to my porch. He stood there for a long moment, looking up at my bedroom window. Then, he raised his hand and tapped, softly, 3 times, just like I'd heard. He stood there for another minute before silently receding back into the shadows. I watched the footage again and again, my blood running cold. The way he moved, so unhurried, so confident, as if he belonged there. He clearly knew my routine, knew when I was home, and knew when I was asleep. The police came, but without a clear view of his face or any actual theft. There wasn't much they could do beyond filing a report and increasing patrols. They suggested I move or at least stay with family for a while. I was terrified, but also fueled by a strange mix of anger and a desperate need to understand. That afternoon, I was cleaning out my car, trying to make it feel safe again. I pulled out the plush blanket the stalker had left. As I unfolded it, something fell out from between the layers. It was a small silver locket, engraved with the initials, and my blood ran cold. Colder than it had been all week. Those were my grandmother's initials. My grandmother, who had passed away 2 years prior. My mother had given me that locket when I moved into this house, telling me it was for safekeeping, a family heirloom I could pass on one day. I had tucked it into a small, velvet pouch and placed it in the back of my nightstand drawer, a drawer I rarely opened. No one, absolutely no one, knew I had that locket or where I kept it. Only my mother knew, and she lived 3 states away. The reality of it slammed into me with brutal force. This wasn't a random stalker. This person had been inside my house. Not just my car, but inside my home, quietly, meticulously, going through my things, finding something as obscure as that locket. The notes, the plant, the tapping. It was all a game, a display of how intimately he knew my life. There was only one explanation that made any sense, and it was the most horrifying one. My realtor. When I bought the house, she was a friendly, overly helpful woman who had insisted on personally bringing the keys over, walking me through every room, pointing out details. She had asked about family, about my background, and I had foolishly shared some details. She would have known about the locket. She would have known the layout of the house. She would have had access to my information, clicked into place with a sickening thud. The notes, the gifts, the increasing intimacy. It was all a meticulous, calculated escalation by someone who had been given the keys to my entire life. Someone who had watched me move in, who knew what I wore, what I liked, and even what heirlooms I kept hidden. I called the police again, this time with a name. They investigated, of course. She denied everything, claiming I was delusional, fabricating stories. But the locket, the specific details in the notes, the footage of a hooded figure she somewhat resembled in stature, even a past complaint from another client about excessive follow-ups. It was enough for them to take it seriously, to issue a restraining order to put her under surveillance. I moved out within a week. I couldn't live there anymore, couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes on me, couldn't forget the silent violation of my home, my privacy. Even now, in a new city, in a new apartment with 3 deadbolts and a state-of-the-art security system, I still feel a chill when I see a handwritten note or a small potted plant. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a faint, rhythmic tapping against my window, 3 soft clicks, a silent reminder of the time someone quietly, patiently, gifted me my own terror. These aren't tales of supernatural beasts, but of the cracks in our reality, the subtle shifts that turn the familiar into the profoundly unsettling. They linger because they tap into the quiet anxieties we all carry, the fear that the world we think we know is far more fragile, more sinister than we dare to imagine, that the ordinary could, at any moment, unravel. If you found yourself looking over your shoulder tonight, remember to subscribe to Scareverse for a new story every week.